president of the Salisbury Forum, and on behalf of our board, I want to welcome you to this special program on housing affordability. Along with the rapidly advancing climate change, the threats to our democracy, the lack of affordable housing is certainly top of mind in most towns and cities and regions across the United States, and definitely here. We are very excited, the Salisbury Forum is very excited to be partnering with the Berkshire-Taconic Community Foundation on this effort. Both of our organizations not only want to learn more through this partnership, but as you will hear later, also help communities identify strategies that can expand their supply of housing and ensure a thriving future. We are very happy to be back here at Salisbury School and hope that most of you were able to enjoy that wonderful reception earlier. We are really grateful to the head of school, Will Webb, who you all met at the reception, his colleagues, and their efforts to welcome us here. As many of you know, the forums are free to the public, and that's why we seek your support to bring these speakers here. Just go to our website, salisburyforum.org, hit the donate button, and select however you want to give. And thank you for doing that. Coming right up in 10 days on Wednesday, October 4th, the forum is going to be joining the Litchfield Journal and the Sharon Playhouse to explore the topic of truth in journalism. This program is going to take place at the Sharon Playhouse during the run of its last show of the season, which is called The Lifespan of a Fact. Our forum will feature the playwrights of the show that is opening next Friday, September 29th through October 15th, as well as a panel of seasoned journalists led by Brian Ross, whom, as many of you know, is the chief investigative correspondent for ABC News for over 20 years. Seating is limited at this event to 150 people. We will be in the theater where they are showing Lifespan of a Fact. Registration is opening tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. on the Sharon Playhouse website. If you go to our website, you'll get the link to the Sharon Playhouse website. So don't delay. 150 people is our tops. And you will need proof of your registration to enter the Playhouse that evening. And now let me turn to my colleague, Peter Taylor, for his welcoming remarks. He's president of Berkshire-Taconic Community Foundation.
I want to join with Pat to welcome you all to this forum, and also just to thank Will Webb and this fantastic team for hosting us tonight. I also want to thank Pat and Lee DeBoer. We have been working on this, I think, since March, as Pat said, through 2 seasons, and it's been a terrific partnership with the Salisbury Forum to come together on such an important issue. For those of you who don't know Berkshire-Taconic, our deepest roots are right here in the Northwest Corner. We were founded by community leaders back in the mid-'80s, a number of names that are so important still to the region in terms of Bob Blum and also Dana Creel and also Don Warner, and Alice Yoakum, who is here in the front row, was such an instrumental. And as Alice points to Janet Andre Block, include this whole row right here in the front is such an important part of the engine that has made Berkshire-Taconic work. Janet Andre Block is one of the early leaders of the foundation as well, and is our current chair of our fund for the Northwest Corner, which is bringing so much energy and support to tonight's forum. So thank you, Janet. At the foundation, we tackle a lot of issues in partnership with nonprofits and our donors. And one thing that's evident to us at the foundation and all of you, that the housing crisis is having widespread impacts on our communities. If you are in communities like mine, it is evident in jobs not being filled. Obviously, homes, the values of homes rising rapidly, rents similarly rising rapidly if available at all. It is a major feature on listservs and Facebook groups, and it is a critical issue that we know is essential to solve in terms of the long-term sustainability and viability of our communities. Just to give you a little snapshot, here in Litchfield County, 28% of residents are considered cost burden, meaning that they spend 30% or more on their income towards housing. And if you look at renters in the region, it's 40 to 50% are cost burden. So that is not a formula for good family stability or economic vitality to have those types of housing costs. When we think about the pressing issues that the foundation is trying to support, we've thought carefully about what our role in housing might be. Considering that there are so many expert organizations and municipalities that are already working on it. One of the things that the foundation does invest in, however, though, is forums like these that are bringing together community voices and community resources to tackle these important issues. Our aim tonight with our partner at the Salisbury Forum is to really steer this discussion in a different direction. By bringing in new perspectives to see how housing and conservation are essential to livable communities, and how there are opportunities to think together through those two lenses to help solve this problem. Indeed, cross-sector collaboration is the ticket for any hard problem to be solved, and it is both the solution, it is both the opportunity for solutions in the short and the longer term. Towards that end, as Pat already alluded, we're going to be sharing more about a grant program because, yes, bringing people together is important, but also using philanthropy as a way to activate change is important as well. So we are working with the Foundation for Community Health, our fund for the Northwest Corner, Berkshire Conic, and also a private family foundation to bring together some resources to hopefully take the best ideas that are inspired by tonight, but also to lift up existing work to have it go forward to support cross-sector collaboration. So that's a sneak peek for something that we'll be talking more about later. And so with that, I think I'm turning it back to Pat to introduce the moderator. But thank you all for being here.
So thank you, Peter. Tonight, we are handling our Q&A process a little differently. All of you, I hope, have picked up an index card and maybe a pen with your programs. And if you'd like one, just signal. Okay, Steve Essex is up there. He has some cards. If you need one, just get one from him. During the program, you can write down any question you'd like to ask, and we will be collecting them at about 7:15 towards the end of the program, and organizing them for our facilitator, Steve Rosenberg, who will be posing the questions to the panel. We have a really terrific, knowledgeable, and committed group of panelists this evening who are really eager to share with you their thoughts on how to expand the supply of housing affordable to all residents in these special communities of the Northwest Corner and the region. Fortunately, Steve Rosenberg has agreed to facilitate this conversation. Steve is currently the co-convener of the Hudson Valley Affordable Housing and Conservation Strategy, which is a collaborative among 10 land trusts and affordable housing organizations that came together 2 years ago in 2021 to keep the region healthy, affordable, and livable. It includes several Habitats for Humanities groups, and as well as the Community Preservation Corporation on the housing development side, and the Dutchess and Columbia County Land Conservancies. Steve served for 31 years at Scenic Hudson as a senior vice president and executive director of the Scenic Hudson Land Trust. And during that time, he deployed more than $100 million to secure 30,000 acres and create a regional network of 45 urban parks and preserves. Steve designed multiple programs to educate and mobilize communities around various projects in the region, from former industrial sites to conserving farms in the Hudson Valley. He has served as the founding chair of the Open Space and Affordable Housing Committees in Rhinebeck, New York, and currently leads the Comprehensive Plan Committee in that town. He's a graduate of Northwestern University and George Washington University Law School. So join me in welcoming Steve, who will introduce the other three panelists.
Thank you so much, Pat and Peter and the Salisbury Forum and the Berkshire-Taconic Community Foundation for organizing this evening's event with a topic that's on the front burner, not just here in Northwest Connecticut, but frankly all over the country. And thanks to all of you for coming out, for being part of this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. It's important. I should say, I shared my remarks with my wife before coming today, and she said, you really need to warn these folks. Affordable housing goes into things like zoning and planning. It's wonky stuff. So, forewarned. Communities everywhere are struggling to respond to the crisis level need for housing that most people can afford. And at the same time, many communities are working to protect their open spaces and farmland and combat climate change. Hardly a day goes by without a major media report, opinion piece, or policy proposal about these issues. It doesn't seem that controversial to say that vibrant, sustainable communities need housing that people can afford and a healthy environment, including accessible open spaces. But figuring out how to get there in ways that will actually be supported by local residents can be a challenge. In places like Northwest Connecticut, there's a proud tradition of support for conservation efforts. In some towns, much of the farmland has been protected from sprawl and subdivisions. Ecologically sensitive tracts have been saved, and nature preserves created. That's all good. It's what I've spent most of my career doing in the Hudson Valley. And in the face of the climate crisis and an increasingly fragmented rural landscape, there's still a lot more to be done. There are also examples of affordable housing projects that nonprofit housing groups have been able to complete. But as years and then decades have passed, and as our rural economies have changed, communities have become more exclusive. Land and housing prices have risen. The size of houses has grown, even as the size of households has shrunk. And the supply of housing that most people can afford simply hasn't come close to meeting the demand. The people who work in the jobs we all rely on for the normal functioning and quality of life of our communities, schools, trades, farms, hospitals, nonprofits, local government services, and the restaurants and stores we frequent have few, if any, options. I believe, and maybe you agree, that there are also hidden but very real costs to the increasing homogeneity that comes with the loss of economic diversity in our communities. Having fewer opportunities for shared experiences across socioeconomic lines results in the loss of a sense of community, and with it, the loss of meaningful civic engagement. Issues like affordable housing become even more intractable as the need becomes so widespread that no one community can address it at scale. And then small incremental efforts, like the one the Housing Commissioner spoke about earlier, to create more affordable housing may not receive the support they deserve because they aren't seen as being significant enough to move the needle. Time and again, even though affordable housing projects are often the greenest development projects around, more energy efficient than most market rate projects, and located in or adjacent to village and town centers, which takes pressure off of the land in the surrounding countryside, neighbors often don't grasp the scale and severity of the problem, or they become alarmed about the perceived impacts of new affordable housing on their quality of life or their property values. A similar dynamic arises when it comes to conservation. and in particular when addressing climate change. Many people believe that the solutions need to happen at a higher structural level because one person's or one family's actions won't make much of a dent. Yet when state or national policy incentivizes solutions like solar on a larger scale, we often see opposition to specific projects, always for principled reasons when they're located nearby. And knowing that millions of people need to relocate away from vulnerable locations due to sea level rise and storm events, how do we make good on our shared responsibility to identify new places where they can live? As it turns out, that phrase, think globally, act locally, is far easier to put on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt than for whole communities to put into action. That act locally part can be particularly confounding. One of the most frequently prescribed solutions to the affordable housing crisis focuses on local zoning that permits only single-family homes and that makes it virtually illegal to build just the kind of mixed-income neighborhoods we need. We must fix this. But oh, can it be difficult to change decades of established zoning policy to encourage more robust and efficient mix of housing types. Many of our communities once had just such a mix, but are now dominated by much higher priced single-family homes. Making these challenges even greater, too often the perception and the reality is that the conservation and affordable housing sectors are either mutually exclusive or worse, opposed to one another. Unfortunately, public programs and private philanthropy traditionally have tended to reinforce that siloed nature. Both sectors depend on land. Both rely on local support from our families, friends, and neighbors. Both want to be part of and to support the communities where they work. They don't have to be separate or at odds. The solutions to one do not need to exclude the other. This evening, we want to focus on the way forward, on constructive solutions and encouraging trends, while highlighting some of the hurdles that stand in the way. How can affordable housing and conservation groups support one another or even collaborate to build stronger communities? How can local government be the critical third partner or lead? How can private philanthropy support these efforts? How can we debunk the myths that help to perpetuate the current state of affairs? And what are some success stories we can learn from? We're fortunate to have with us representatives of three sectors that hold some of the answers. Jocelyn Ayer is director of the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity and one of the region's leading affordable housing professionals. She previously served as Community and Economic Development Director for the Northwest Hills Council of Governments. She has a master's degree in regional planning and has worked with many towns in the region to create municipal housing plans and to advance numerous planning and development initiatives. Michael Polemis is board chair of the Land Trust Alliance, the leading voice of the more than 950 land trusts across the nation that work to conserve land and connect people to it. In 1986, Michael helped found the Columbia Land Conservancy right next door in New York, where he continues to serve on the board. He's also served on the boards of the Shelburne Museum, the Columbia Economic Development Corporation, and the Coldwater Conservation Fund of Trout Unlimited. Finally, Gordon Ridgway is first selectman of the town of Cornwall, a position he's held since 1992. He and his family operate Ridgway Farm, which was founded over 40 years ago and which was protected from development by a conservation easement placed on it by his parents. Over the years, Gordon has been involved in a variety of local conservation efforts, including having written about renewable energy solutions back in the 80s, and now is keenly interested in how to create more affordable housing options for his community. And he would never forgive me if I didn't mention he's an alum of the Southbury School. So let's get started. Please come up. some of these questions I'm going to address to all of the panelists, and some will pick on one or another. But I think it's important to start off with a question for everyone to answer. What role does your sector, either housing, local government, or conservation, play in ensuring that our communities have housing that most people can afford and a healthy environment? Michael, would you like to start off?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I think at this point, our community, meaning the land trust community, is still struggling with what our role should or can be, with a total actually of 1,200 land trusts in the country, 950 being members of the Land Trust Alliance. There is a universe of solutions that are beginning to percolate up. There are land trusts that are completely invested. They have created subsidiary organizations and are actually developing property. But for the most part, they're still at the stage of asking questions, of finding partners. And I think that is probably the most important thing that they can be doing now. The Land Trust Alliance is working on creating various options, what we call tool chests, to help our members navigate through this process. But what you have to understand is our currency is land. And we like to say land is the answer. And in fact, that makes things a lot easier if you reduce it to that. What we need to do is we need to stop thinking of land in a transactional basis. In other words, acres and bucks. How many pieces of property can we conserve and go on to the next project? We have to start thinking of land as something that we can contribute to this problem of affordable housing. And how we would do that is simple. There are plenty of properties that any land trust are offered, either to purchase or as gifts or to get involved with on conservation easements that may not be ideally suited to classic conservation easement criteria, but may be perfect for housing. We need to start, I hate to use the cliche, but we need to think outside of the conservation box and stop thinking of affordable housing as something different from what we do, and stop thinking of a solution to affordable housing as simply building more affordable houses. Now that may sound a little odd, but in my view, and I'm not speaking for the Alliance or any organization in particular, is we need to think of affordable housing in the context of where these places are located, that they can provide community space for gardens, playgrounds, and connect with green spaces, instead of relegating housing to what historically were the edges of towns. So I'm not sure I've answered the question, but that's where we are.
Well, I think the answer is it's evolving, but you're moving in the right direction.
Hopefully.
Gordon, would you answer that, please? What role does the local government sector play in ensuring communities have housing and a healthy environment?
Well, I think the biggest thing that local governments can do is acknowledge that there is a problem, because some places feel that everything's fine. And I remember before I became a selectman, I was on the town's planning and zoning commission. We had quite a forceful first selectman at the time. We sat at our end of the table, the planning and zoning commission, and said, "You folks aren't going home tonight until we do something about affordable housing." And that was 40 years ago, when I was living at home, pioneering the boomerang generation. And now my kids are living at home, following the trends. And in fact, most of their contemporaries are living at home. All my son's classmates from his local school are living at home. Litchfield County has one of the highest rates of that demographic, 20-year-olds living at home. So I think the main thing is for the local leaders to step up and say, there is a problem, we need to address it, you're not going home, and do we do? And so, because of the force of that particular personality, we have 16 rental units in Cornwall. So, and we went on from that to do other things. And I think, again, one of the things we did was we hired Jocelyn Ayer to write planner conservation development for the town, which put out, identify what's really going on in the town, and that we need to have more rental units, and those changes have only become more real with what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. Our price of housing has gone from $350,000 3 years ago in Cornwall, average sales price, to over $880,000 last year. So that's, the impact of that is huge. We've had some success before that happened with our town being cheaper than other places, so we're able to attract younger families in, which helped our school population go up. But now we're at a plateau because that housing price and the price of is denied entry point for young families to move into town. So I think acknowledging the program or the problem is important. We have a housing group of diverse people that are working on this outside of our housing corporation, which actually is building housing to be actually a local advocacy group, which we may turn into a housing commission. But again, we're still hammering away at the problem, and we're still not going home until we solve it.
Thank you, Gordon. Jocelyn, you had a groundbreaking today that the commissioner was at, your organization did, but I'm guessing those don't happen every day or every week. How would you describe the role in the community that your organization plays in providing housing and a healthy environment?
Yeah, so, I think there's 3 ways that in the housing sector, again, especially the local housing nonprofits, like the one that had the groundbreaking today, can play a role in this. First is renovating existing buildings and utilizing parcels that have already been built on. Nobody wants to see farm fields turned into subdivisions. And so utilizing parcels that already have homes on them, and renovating existing housing into affordable opportunities is one way. Another is making sure that when we can, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that we're building in the village center areas where residents do have closer access to the grocery store and the library, and there's already infrastructure and roads there. So when we can, building in those areas in our traditional village centers. And then the third way is, as you also mentioned, affordable housing is sometimes the greenest housing in our communities. We make sure that it's very energy efficient. There's a lot of solar panels going up on affordable housing developments. And obviously that has 2 benefits. It's both more environmentally friendly, but also in the long term for the folks living in those units and in that housing, you've got lower energy costs long term. So those are kind of 3 ways that I think the housing sector, and when we build affordable housing, that we can make sure that we're also thinking about the environmental health of the community.
Great, thank you. I want to talk about the challenge of these goals of having both housing people can afford and a healthy environment, and how it's directly impacting the lives of ordinary people in the community. Gordon, you spoke to that to some extent, with young people having trouble finding housing opportunity. I'm wondering if you could expand on that and maybe talk about some of the other ways that ordinary people's lives are being impacted.
Yes, I think, again, I like the idea of breaking down the silos and looking at all these things as a community, because you can't separate out the ability of people to live in an area with how well your community functions. And probably the most important thing our town does is to quickly respond to people in the middle of the night on an ambulance call. And I used to be one of the younger people on the crew. I'm not an EMT, but they used to let me drive the ambulance once in a while. And now I've luckily had been able to retire that role because we've had some young people take my place. And again, having those young people there 24/7 is a direct primary response of the community to the people having probably the toughest time that they'll have. I think also having a vibrant community is important because when people get in that ambulance, it's important that we have a vibrant community that has enough young people having children so that we have a full hospital in Sharon. And there's a direct connection between being able to sustain that facility, which a lot of people in this area are 45 minutes to an hour away from somewhere else, and having a vibrant community with a diverse young population base. And so I think it's important to get outside the ways that people can look at housing as a separate issue, but if there aren't people here to have that response, then it will really eat away at our ability to have the facilities that all our people rely on. And whether it's a school, it was great to see Lisa Carter here. Our school went up and, we were talking about consolidating schools. You lose your school, what's the draw for young people moving to your town without an elementary school? And now our population went up, it's sort of stabilized now, and it's only not going up. We would like to welcome, I know there's people that would like to settle in Cornwall and contribute, but with the price of housing, that enrollment will remain about half what it was when I went there and half what it was when my kids went there. So we have plenty of room to do things, but this is definitely playing out as everybody is reacting to a very tight and unaffordable housing market. And one more thing, I would like to also think of this in a broader term than just what some people think of affordable housing, because now housing has become unaffordable for almost everybody that our community relies on.
Thank you, Gordon. Michael, in this context, I know the land trust community talks about something called community-centered conservation. And if you could share your thoughts a little bit about, I know you spoke about projects that involve access to parks and community gardens and whatnot, but what does community-centered conservation mean in this context of the lives of ordinary people?
Well, I think, again, if I go back a little bit, the historic motivation for land trust was always protecting land. We never actually had a good conversation about what were we protecting the land for, and more importantly, who. And the who has become critical. Land trusts are increasingly getting involved in trail building and establishing parks. One of the unintended consequences of our success has been that as we protect more and more land, we find that land values actually rise all around protected land, which then means it's less affordable for people who have been living and working in any community. And so community conservation is now taking on a whole new life. And that is, how do we as land trusts become accountable to our communities? How do we actually serve them beyond giving tax breaks, to be blunt, giving tax breaks to wealthy landowners, which is the engine of land conservation. In Columbia County, we do it through educational programs. We do it through operating a 4,000-acre park system. But the real trick, and to come back to the whole affordable housing piece, how do we connect affordable housing to the work that we're doing? How do we deal with access? And I don't mean, building a better parking lot, but you're building a better parking lot for people who don't have two cars, and the one car is being used to go to work. So, it's a huge challenge. But I think it's one that if we get out of, as you mentioned, silos and thinking in silos, we can figure it out.
Thank you, Michael. Jocelyn, I'm going to ask you to answer the same question, and then maybe you can provide the transition into our next question, which is about what does success look like? I think it's easy for us to talk about collaboration and breaking down silos and what, people have images in their heads of what affordable housing projects are or what they might look like. Jocelyn came prepared to scoop the other panelists with some slides, some images that she's going to show us of some of the ways success looks. But if you could also talk a little bit about how this challenge affects ordinary people.
Sure. So you were mentioning we were earlier today at a groundbreaking for 10 new units at Sarah Village, just down the road here, affordable rental housing. So that's 10 units. We have 104 households on our waiting list for those 10 units, and actually an additional 20 households who have expressed interest in applying once those 10 new units get online. We're very lucky here in Salisbury. We have a couple other projects that we're working on, and that will create additional units over the coming years. But obviously, 10 units that'll be done summer of next year is not going to do much for those 104 households who are waiting. We do see in the region there are over 1,100 households on waiting lists. And sometimes people wait 2 years, 5 years. Many people can't wait that long, and they end up having to move away to find a housing option that they can afford. You mentioned, or Peter mentioned, I think, the number of folks in our communities that are housing cost burdened. We have a lot, even in Salisbury and Cornwall and in Falls Village and Kent, we have a lot of households that are spending fully half of their income every month to pay their mortgage or their rent and their heating costs. And that is just not sustainable. What it means is that they are not filling their prescriptions, or they're very much reliant on assistance from the food pantry, or heating assistance to pay all of the other things that a household really needs to be able to pay for. If you're paying half of your income on housing, you just can't pay for all the other things that a household needs. So we have a lot of households in our region that are really in an unsustainable place, and that are really struggling kind of every day to make ends meet.
Thank you. So now we're going to pivot from the challenges to what are some of the strategies, what does success look like, where are the opportunities, what are the stories that need to be, the narratives that need to be talked about differently to make some change. But we'll start with Jocelyn sharing some slides of success.
All right, so I'm just going to show you some examples of what success looks like, if this works. So actually, the Commissioner of the Department of Housing mentioned this project earlier in her remarks. This is in Litchfield, and what this success is 8 units of home ownership, all with solar, very energy efficient for the homeowners who come live here. Actually, we just finished construction, so I think homeowners are moving in now. But surrounded, those 8 homes are surrounded by 9 acres of permanently preserved open space by the Litchfield Land Trust. So again, a collaboration between a land trust and a housing trust on a specific parcel where, again, it made sense to have both housing and conservation there. This is an example from Norfolk, around the corner here. This is, again, in the village center, 5 existing homes that were renovated to be permanently affordable rental housing, all in walking distance to the Norfolk Hub and the pub and the cafe. and the library and the town hall. But this is 12 units and 5 buildings, again, all renovations of existing homes in walking distance to the village center, done by the Foundation for Norfolk Living, which is the nonprofit housing organization there. Oh, I want to skip Salisbury. So in Salisbury, what this looks like, and this is again just one example in Lakeville of both utilizing existing homes and also infill development in the village center. So at the bottom part there is Lakeview Apartments, which was recently acquired by the Salisbury Housing Committee with a generous donation from Salisbury Family Services to do the acquisition. And right now, I'm on the board of the Salisbury Housing Committee as well. We are renovating that with funds from the Department of Housing, again, to make sure it's energy efficient and a nice place for those residents to live. And then the other picture up in the top corner there is Holly Place. I'm not sure if any of you came to the 10 hours of public hearing we had on Holly Place, but it was permitted by planning and zoning. We do hope to start construction next year on Holly Place. It will be 10 units of affordable rental housing, again, affordable to different income levels and different household sizes, and all in walking distance to everything that Lakeville has to offer, including Nizza's Pizza, which is my kid's favorite. And in Kent, what it looks like, as Justin knows well, is Stewart Farm Apartments. You can see there was a farmhouse on this property from the 1800s that was in pretty bad shape. And the Kent Affordable Housing nonprofit fixed that up, built onto the back of it, like you see many farmhouses, and then built additional units. It's 13 units, right? Again, all affordable rental units with solar panels on the roof, and in walking distance to Kent's Village Center. So we have a lot of great examples of what this can look like in our communities. We just need to do more of it, and we need to do it more quickly than we have been. And on a town scale, Gordon mentioned this a little bit earlier, when we worked together on the town's plan of conservation and development. Again, in the town of Cornwall, a lot of interest on the Planning and Zoning Commission and a lot of others, and really thinking about where, what areas are suitable for housing, and what areas should be permanently preserved. And so I think the road to success in many of our towns are planning efforts like this, where we're having that conversation in our towns about, look, we need both. We need conservation areas and we need housing. And let's be strategic and really think about, where it can go. This was a very detailed analysis, including, where are the good soils for septic, where are the steep slopes, what areas have already been permanently preserved and what's left over, what areas have infrastructure and can accommodate some more housing development. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, we did, with the help from the Foundation for Community Health had a grant program, did a mini grant that created this film that really interviews folks in our communities that need affordable housing and that are living in affordable housing now. And again, I think what success really looks like is making sure that these folks can continue to stay in our communities, young families, seniors, single parents, and all of those folks that, again, we really rely on to be part of our communities and be able to live here.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Some inspiration to drive us forward. So Gordon, from the local government perspective, what do you see as the strategies that maybe have the most potential so that you're not having to have that meeting you talked about last another 40 years, so that we can maybe see some of the quicker results Jocelyn talked about?
Well, I think part of the answer would have to be sort of looking at success and realizing how much this means to a town to be able to house its people, because each one of these towns in our region is slightly different. Cornwall being a smaller town than Salisbury has some differences in that we have some vacancies in our storefronts, and some of that is because there's less shoppers, there's less people there, so and there's also less people to work, which could be another whole part of the housing thing. So when we looked at doing senior housing, we were able to buy land right in the middle of Cornwall Bridge, which helps sustain the country market, which will reopen again, but having a customer base right there next to the market is really important. So looking at our village centers and having people being able to live in those village centers is really important to us. I think also one of the things that we used to see, or we saw a success that I would like to relate, that I was in the parking lot of LeBon's grocery store here in Salisbury, and a friend of mine who grew up in Salisbury looked after my parents when they were up in gear, but had to leave town, had finally waited her 2 years and had been able to return to town because of the affordable housing program we have in town. And she said, "I'm so glad to return to town. I'm not leaving again. I'm here." So that to me is what success looks like as individual people. So often we think about theories or people, but it's not theoretical when you know people that are really affected by this. Similarly, it's great to see friends of mine here from Cornwall that are part of a 30 years ago, we had a generous donor give the town. At one point there was no, we were looking like there wasn't going to be any public swimming in Cornwall on Creamill Lake, so this benefactor of the town, his family gave the town some area for a beachfront. She gave 2 lots to the Housing Corporation, and her son gave some of the other lakeside property to the Conservation Trust for preservation. So we got public recreation, and we got 2 housing lots, and we got some preservation all at the same time. So again, that to me is the model, and I would like to see land trusts look at that model, and when somebody wants to give you property, check that box if there's not some housing you can do at the same time. Because I know just from the people that are living in these particular places, it makes a big impact on the town, and it certainly makes a huge impact on people's lives. And the best part about living in a small town is small victories can be huge.
Great example, Gordon. One that serves the whole community.
Yeah.
Michael, if you were to look out not 40 years, but maybe 5 years, from the sort of National Land Trust perspective, what would success look like in terms of this conversation?
Well, I think the immediate marker of success for me would be that land trusts make affordable housing an integral part of their strategic plans. So you start with that. How do you do it is another question. I think the how is to open your minds, listen. There are partners out there who know a lot more about this than we do. Learn from them. I would encourage land trusts to bring on new board members who might not have expertise in the conservation space, but are expert in the housing space. I'd ask boards, I'd encourage boards, and the reason I'm focusing on boards is that they tend to be the conservative brakes on innovation for a lot of reasons, not the least being their fiduciary responsibilities. But I would ask boards to become less risk averse, to stop fretting about mission creep. If it were entirely up to me, I'd have every land trust take their mission statement out and burn it. Mission statements are used as an excuse not to do things, and they get in the way of innovation. So those are a handful of recommendations.
Count me among the converted. So I know in a moment we're going to begin to transition into Q&A from the audience, but what I think is really important, and Gordon, you hit on this in your last answer, what could members of the communities in Northwest Connecticut and more broadly do to actually be supportive of these efforts so that they can happen more quickly, so that the people who are impacted directly can see a pathway to their future in these communities? Who would like to go first? Jocelyn.
Okay. I think the first thing anybody can do is really support your local housing nonprofit. We have terrific local housing nonprofits here in the Northwest Corner, in Salisbury, Kent, and Cornwall, and I'm just looking around the room at the folks here, and really in all of our towns, and getting on their mailing list, making sure that you know what they're up to so that you can go to a planning and zoning commission hearing, for example. You don't have to stay for all 10 hours, I promise, or to a town meeting when they need support. I think really just supporting the local housing nonprofits, I would say, is the first thing. And I'll just quickly, another thing, Peter and I are going to talk about a grant program that we're launching to engage the community in more conversations around this, and maybe even to engage some individual property owners who might be interested in thinking about something like what Gordon said, where you have a parcel and you're interested in doing conservation, recreation, and housing all on a parcel. So we would encourage many folks to look into the grant opportunity and work with us to continue this conversation after today.
Fantastic. Gordon, in your community, in the town of Cornwall, and what you know of the other municipalities, how can community members help move things forward, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I think what we're looking to do is to try to work on getting more housing built, which will inevitably lead to some pushback. But the Housing Corporation is in need of funding and land. I think the other thing that strikes me too, as a long-time resident, that because we're in a smaller place, there's often a hard part of this story is for older people in town have to leave our town because there's no diverse housing to meet their needs. So there's another whole element that this is of people that this is affecting. So I would like to see the overlap or the common interest in the environment unite these two issues, and it would seem like if Housing Trust can also champion the idea of building smaller houses on smaller lots that are energy efficient and environmentally benign, it seems like that is a win for everybody. And of course, the funding ability of land trusts is impressive to me. And since in our town, I think the state forest comprises 7,800 acres. The land trust has acquired about 2,000 acres. The Housing Corporation owns under 100 acres, as does the town. So just that large amount of land is out there, but the amount we actually need to make significant gains in housing is under 100 acres. So it's a very small percentage. The thought that the town will change dramatically overnight, if we do some of these issues, I think is a false flag. And it's a solvable problem, as I said, in a small town. You can get victories, and I will say also being able to integrate people of diverse backgrounds into your town is also a goal. And I was at a farmer's market several weeks ago, and this lady came up to me and she said, "Are you Ridgway?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Is your son Ian?" I said, "Yes." He says, I had to call, I was on the floor and he picked me up 2 nights ago." She said, "It was thrilling." So again, that lifted my spirits, and I think that's sort of what it's all about, is lifting each other up when we need it. He blushed. That's all good.
We all have a role to play. And Mike.
Well, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. Show up. Show up at board meetings, town board meetings, zoning board meetings, planning board meetings. Vote with your feet, vote at the ballot box. I mean, these are all things that you all already know and already do. But it is as simple as that. In a small town, in small communities, it doesn't take much to move the needle. In my town, in my county, elections are regularly won or lost by 2 votes, 3 votes. So, show up, volunteer. And if you're a member of a land trust, tell them to get off their rear ends and get involved. That's what does it.
Thank you all. We are going to transition now into audience Q&A. And at the beginning of that, there are actually 2 people in the audience who we want to make sure we hear from, so we're going to call on them first. We're very important perspectives. Jennifer Cronholm-Clark, where are you? There you are. Great.
I'm Jennifer Cronholm-Clark. I'm the chair of the Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission and vice president of the Salisbury Housing Trust. I have a family in town. I've got 2 children at Salisbury Central School, and we are exceedingly grateful to be able to live in town. We own a house through the Salisbury Housing Trust, right sort of on the outskirts of Salisbury Village, and we love living here. I love that my children can walk into town and go to the library, and somehow they always end up at Sweet Williams on the way home. But if you turn the other way out of the driveway, it's right down the road is a trailhead, it's the Appalachian Trail, and we can go up and enjoy the views from there. So I think families are attracted to our towns because of that open space, and that we all agree that the open space is really important and one of the reasons that we're here. And we need places to live. And so through my work on this town board in particular, I've started to learn, and I apologize, I'm dragging us into the wonkiness. I'm going to ask a zoning question. Zoning is really important in terms of what our village centers look like, where houses get built, and how our communities grow. And zoning has always been really mysterious to me, and every time I talk to someone who knows something about zoning, I feel like it's a magical light bulb. I'm like, I never even considered that one regulation could be changed, and suddenly we have all these possibilities. So I was hoping to hear from each of you, in your opinion, if you had a magic zoning wand, and you could make one change to zoning regulations that would have the biggest, what would have the biggest impact on the ability to create affordable housing in our communities?
I can jump in on that. I think, so the good thing is that we have a planning and zoning commission that is aware of what's going on. And so they are looking at redoing some of the regulations to allow for accessory apartments to become easier to build or bigger. I think that's a tool that's very useful. And then the other one, they are looking at allowing multifamily housing in various parts of town, which I don't believe is allowed now. I'm not entirely up on the regulations, but it seems like the lack of rental housing or being able to build something besides a big colonial on several acres is really eating at the social fabric. There are other examples of more intense uses on land that would allow more people to live on a smaller space. And again, I look at this through this perspective of a lot of victories, as I said before, with the numbers of a lot of our town, a lot of the farmland, a lot of the forest land has already been conserved, and a lot of the remaining land is challenged and tremendously expensive. So there has to be some reflection of that in being able to do some sort of creative development in the remaining buildable areas.
Jocelyn, from the perspective of affordable housing organization?
Yeah, I was just having a hard time, and a planner, so, but I was having a hard time picking one. I think that, again, just not to get too wonky and get your wife concerned, but, I worked with all of the 16 communities in Litchfield County on affordable housing plans and looked at their zoning regulations. And basically, literally all of them, the only thing you can do by right without a special permit that requires notifying abutters and the potential for 10 hours of public hearing on anything is just a single family home on 3 acres, basically. Everything else requires a special permit, a public hearing, and a lot of process. And so I think one thing is every community looking at, again, really proactively identifying where do you want housing to go, and then make it by right. It can still be with site plan review, and I know that's getting wonky. Planning and zoning can still have oversight over it, and setbacks and all of that stuff, buffers, all of those things that matter. But just don't make everything other than single family houses require a special permit process. Really be proactive, think about where you want it to go, and zone it for that, so that you can create some other types of housing that we need, like downsizing options, without having to go through a very time-consuming, expensive, and sometimes controversial public hearing process.
Thank you, Jen, for your question, and thanks for those responses. I now want to turn to Lisa Carter, the superintendent of Region 1 schools. And Lisa, if you could share with us a little bit of the perspective from where you sit on the importance of this issue to the school district and to the communities you serve.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I know many of you, some of you I don't know. Okay, I'll speak louder. I'm Lisa Carter. I'm the superintendent in the Region 1 school district. We have about 1,325 students and about 425 staff. Anywhere between 30 to 40 to 50% of our staff live outside of the region, and some of them commute over an hour to get back and forth to work every day. This issue is really important to our district, our region, from a variety of perspectives. First is, as Jennifer said, the families. Just to give you an example, of how much things have changed. I've been an educator in this district. I started as a teacher at the high school 22 years ago. There were 625 students at the high school. This year we have 309. A lot of families have left because they cannot afford to live here. Having these young families are such an important part of building a balanced, robust, and wonderful community. Your story, I hear it from families over and over again. And we lose families, they leave. The second thing is we have teachers who are really excited that I'm here tonight and raising a voice about this because they would love to be able to live here. They want to be part, it's not just, that they would like to live in the place that they would work. They would like their children to go to our schools. Our schools are fantastic. So they would like to have them have access to the benefit of that education. Then they can be coaches. They can be, they can stay after school to work with students. But now they leave because they need to get home and take care of their families. And after a couple of years, they may get tired of that and we leave and we have turnover. And we know that stability of relationships in communities are really important. And they're really important to building safe environments. If students don't feel safe because they feel that there's change, and I don't want to say they don't feel safe, but if they feel anxious because there's change or turnover, even they may not be conscious of that, their accessibility, them having access to curriculum is not as strong. So for those reasons. And then the last reason I will say is because as our enrollment declines in our schools, it puts incredible upward pressure on cost per pupil. So when it comes to budget time, we are incredibly scrutinized in terms of how we're using resources and how we can cut back on resources that are already in short supply. So that starts to put pressure on the existing system and threatens to compromise the very strong educational structure that we have in place right now. So more students in school is good for everyone. And they grow up to become the Ayer Ridgway that provides the experience of lifting someone up and providing lots of other really great services in town, future business owners. And we want our kids that graduate from our high school and go away and do something else to be able to come back. So this is my home. I moved here 22 years ago from New York. I've dedicated my life to the education system here, and I would really like to see it be sustainable and to go on for all of our families. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that really important perspective. Now we're going to turn to some of, we don't have time to ask all of the questions that you shared on the index cards, but we're going to turn to some of them. Thank you for offering them. This one, I think, Michael, is best addressed to you. How does a land trust determine when it makes sense to build on a land trust policy? Is it not allowed on some properties and allowed on others?
Good question. Each easement is somewhat unique, but the underlying principle is to maintain conservation value on that given piece of property. So as things generally stand now, that argues for less development, not more development. What land trusts don't often do is look at land that may not be suitable for an easement, but that they may want to get involved in. And that's the space that we really can fill. And that's, we have plenty, at least in Columbia County, every year we get gifts of land. Not all of that land is suitable for an easement. Some of it ends up as a publicly accessible property. But we probably have turned down properties that would have been ideal for siting housing because it didn't meet the criteria either in size, acreage, or checked all the boxes in terms of conservation value. So I think it's more a question of how the land trust changed those boxes.
Thank you. This is a question that we really haven't talked about much, but I think is really important. Can you speak about what financing is available for efforts? And are the efforts that are underway warranting or have they sparked new financing models? Are local banks involved? Is it just philanthropy? Is it just state subsidies? Where are there opportunities for new types of financing? Jocelyn, is that?
Yeah, so I'll start at the end of the process. In terms of actually constructing affordable housing, there is a good amount of state and federal funding to actually help us build it when we get to the point of building it. Maria Horn was at our event earlier today. She is a good advocate for us to continue to have enough resources in the state budget so that we can pay to construct those units when we get to that point. I would say the pieces of financing that we are still really working on. The first one is quick access to acquisition money. We've seen Kent, for example, a property that came on the market that was for a very reasonable price that had basically a house with an accessory apartment and some land around it that could have accommodated some additional units. But it literally got sold like the second it went on the market, and our local housing nonprofits don't have access to $300,000, $400,000 to just write a check to somebody the day something goes on the market. So one of the things that we are looking into is trying to find a way to have a revolving loan fund, for example, for acquisition, so that we can act as quickly as somebody else who can write a check for $300,000 on day one. Because this real estate market, when you find opportunities like that, you really do have to be able to act quickly. We are lucky right now, the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity has what we call feasibility or seed funding. So when a nonprofit does find an opportunity and is able to acquire it, or to think about whether it wants to acquire it, we have some money we can provide to local nonprofits to help them do soil testing, auction payments, do the things that you need to do to really figure out whether you have a viable project. And then it does come down, this is it takes a village thing. It does in terms of getting your project from the place where you know it's viable to the place where you can apply to the state and or federal funding programs for funding the construction. You need pre-development money, and that's a gap that we've been working on. That does require philanthropy, local banks. We had NBT Bank at our ceremony today, who was providing funding for the Salisbury Housing Committee for our Salem Village project. So it does take banks and philanthropy a lot of others to kind of fill that gap at that stage of the process.
Great, thank you for that answer. We've been focusing primarily on these three sectors of affordable housing, local government, and conservation, but it seems like the two other key sectors are where's the money coming from? And all of you, the community. And two questions which I think are two sides of the same coin that I'll ask the panelists to respond to. On the one hand, what can we do to create more urgency and action? And the flip side of the coin, how do you overcome NIMBY attitudes? Or do you want to give that one a try?
Well, you got to eat your vegetables and have backbone, and expect that. Part of the thing that's interesting too is that as everything is tightened up in the real estate market, there's less and less building, at least in our town. So the minute anything gets proposed, it's a change. And somehow there's a notion that any change is bad, and if we just hold our breath long enough, nothing will change. But the sand is shifting underneath our feet as we're holding our breath because of things like the price of housing. So I think a certain amount of opposition can be anticipated for things, but I think if you have a coherent town plan that says this is what's important for our community to move forward, as opposed to go from project to project, that helps because it all lays out a vision for the future, and that vision's for a healthy community. So again, then you have a proposal you weigh up against the plans and the regulations, and that is part of it. I think also an exciting thing, which gets back to the last question a little bit, that I've seen in another town, was the ability to mix housing up a bit. And so it's not just necessarily a income restricted housing. I believe you can have that mixed in with market rate housing, rentals, so that you get a diverse project in some ways. And that also helps with some of the financing, because one thing I think is important for people to see or hear is that, at least in our town, the rent, there's no more rents. There's, other than $4,000 a month, there's no rents. And that's a new development in the last 3 years. So there's a need for people who live in town a long time, new people, older people, young people. There's a huge need for rental housing, and that can be of diverse incomes, and sometimes people that can afford market rates, I would like to think, would be able to help subsidize through those rents some of the projects for people that are more stressed with their income. So I think there's a real opportunity, like same thing with energy efficiency or whatever, to look at things differently and mix things up a bit, which could be a real solution.
Thank you. Michael or Jocelyn?
I just, in terms of the sense of urgency, I think continuing to tell the stories of folks in our communities that need this housing and the impacts that it's having on them. And again, I'll point out Mary's great stories that were in the Litchfield Journal, so hopefully you guys have seen them, and they're here. I think there's some booklets of them here. Again, stories of people in our community that really need this. I think lifting those up and getting those out there as much as we can is really helpful. And also telling, again, success stories. We have a lot of examples of successes. We can do this. We know how to do it. We just have to sort of come together. And then I think the Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission has done a great job. If you live in Salisbury and you're not on their newsletter mailing list, get on that mailing list, because I think, again, keeping it in the forefront of people's minds, and also making sure that residents know what's going on in terms of events and ways that they can support the projects that are happening and see the success stories and hear the stories of the folks that need this. The Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission has done a great job in their newsletter, kind of lifting all of that up and keeping the conversation going month to month.
Thank you. Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, the NIMBY issue is hard. Somebody gave me a new definition or a new acronym, which was BANANA, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So there is a part of the NIMBY community that you can't get to. But I'm a believer in the healing powers of enlightened self-interest, and your comments about the future of a community without children in school. The fact that the people you rely on to put out fires, to plow the roads, can't live where you live. That your firehouse, at least in my town, had to build dormitories because they know that the day is coming when they're going to have to hire professionals, which if we think we're spending money now, just wait. So I think we have to make an economic argument, and we need a plan, a story that actually makes sense to people.
Thank you. We've got two more questions on cards that we'll have time to ask. One is, please speak to the proliferation of short-term rentals, such as Airbnbs, and their impact on available housing for full-time residents. Is there a way to limit this or change that dynamic?
Yeah, so this is something I've worked with a lot of communities on as well. Again, we've seen since Airbnb and other ways of making it really easy for short-term rentals have come to our communities. A lot of what used to be year-round rental housing is now being rented short-term. And so, again, to Gordon's point about there just being no rental housing really available, that is part of the problem. The communities can limit the availability of, through zoning, limit the number of short-term rentals in your community. It's difficult difficult to do. You have to enforce it if you're going to make a rule. And so it is challenging for small towns to, to adopt those types of regulations, but it can be done. You can require all the short-term rentals to register and to pay a fee. So there are some zoning strategies around that. To Gordon's point earlier around accessory apartments, I think accessory apartments are great and they can be a part of the solution, but in our communities, and again, especially in Salisbury, most of them become Airbnbs. So they're not really providing, rental housing for folks who live here year-round. There are ways you can say that you're allowed to have an accessory apartment, but it cannot be rented short-term. Some of the towns in our region do that. I know Colebrook and I think Heartland have that regulation. You can do an accessory apartment by right, but you cannot rent it short-term. So there are ways through zoning regulations and other ways to permitting mechanisms to kind of keep that under wraps.
Gordon, anything from the perspective?
No, other than, again, we're sort of at sometimes at the mercy of national trends, and certainly the Airbnbs have, I think they're more popular in some places than others, but they certainly set a high floor for rental markets now. I don't think we may have as many in Cornwall as maybe they do in Salisbury, but they certainly have increased the rents.
Thank you. The last question. So we've been talking almost entirely about the nonprofit affordable housing world, and there are also for-profit affordable housing builders, developers, and there are also just builders out there. And this question is, where are the real estate agents or builders in this conversation? And where do they fit in, and where might they fit in if they're not currently part of the conversation?
Well, I will just say, again, I worked with 16 towns in Litchfield County on affordable housing plans. We almost always had a realtor on our steering committee for the housing plans. The realtors are saying the same thing that we are all saying today, which is, again, they're seeing young families that are priced out of the market. There's no diversity of housing type for them to offer. And while prices have skyrocketed, obviously incomes have not skyrocketed at the same rate. And so I have been in conversation with a lot of realtors. Certainly, a lot of them have the same concerns that we've talked about tonight. We don't have a lot of for-profit developers in Litchfield County. Again, most of our towns are limited in terms of water. Gordon's town has no public water and sewer. You can't do a lot of density. You can't do, anything but single-family houses by right. Land is really expensive. So we are really reliant on our nonprofit housing organizations to do the development here, because of those factors.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge my fellow selectman, Priscilla Pavel, who is here, and she's also a realtor, so she keeps our board up to date with real estate trends, which have gotten increasingly tight. I think she said today there's 4 houses listed in Cornwall or something today, and most of those are listed for over $1 million. So we're all too well aware of that reality, and it looks like there's going to have to be a concerted effort to go beyond the market to acquire land, not much land, but some land to do these things moving forward.
Thank you. Well, I want to transition to the last part, which is going to involve Peter, but first join me in thanking Michael.
Wow, what an informative and inspiring panel tonight. And thank you all for your contributions, your insights, and your new ideas. From the earliest conversations I had with Janet Clark and with Pat Jenny about this forum, we wanted to create a different type of opportunity for Litchfield County and for the Northwest Corner. Yes, we wanted to bring together a group of people who cared about sustainable, livable communities, but we wanted to broaden the audience to have it be both that come to that question with an eye on housing, but also other attributes that make communities livable, such as access to land and healthy environments. And so thank you all for coming and being part of this, because we wanted to bring together perspectives that hopefully indeed could generate new insights and new ideas that could lead to new plans that might be able to help address this issue. And so to help move along either existing work that is supporting, that is based on cross-sector collaboration or partnerships with conservation and housing, or to help bring forward new ideas, we have available grant resources. And these are available because of a partnership with the Foundation for Community Health, the Fund for the Northwest Corner, a private foundation in Berkshire County. And I shared before that when the foundation thinks about an issue like housing, we recognize that there are so many important experts and expert organizations that are working every day on this. And so this partnership with the foundations involved is turning to the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunities to be our partner and grant maker in this, for this grant program. And so Jocelyn's going to share a little bit more about the aims of the grant program and also how you all and others can gain more information and also to hopefully ultimately apply. So Jocelyn.
Yeah, so we're very excited about this, and again, it's a partnership with Foundation for Community Health and Connect Community Foundation and the Northwest Corner Fund to provide grant funding to communities, so either towns or nonprofits within a town, to continue this conversation and do some collaboration within your community on this topic. And so we're going to be looking for proposals, and the grant guidelines are on our website. They're also going to be on Berkshire Tonic's website. And so you can get all of the details there. But we're looking for proposals, again, that show this kind of cross-sector collaboration. It doesn't have to be just conservation organizations and housing organizations. It could bring in, schools, employers, faith communities, really everyone everyone or anyone into the conversation. So we're looking for proposals that do that. And that really, again, support the housing efforts in your community and help them kind of get to the next stage. Some examples of the types of projects. Again, we're really open to any of your ideas for how to continue this conversation and make it kind of productive and, result in some more housing opportunities being created. But for example, reaching out to landowners who might be interested in, again, at the site scale, doing something that includes both housing and conservation. It could be a town level effort or a regional effort at identifying high priority conservation areas and areas for housing opportunities. It could be a webinar series or workshops or neighborhood conversations, again, that continue to build the collaboration and the dialogue within our communities about this issue. And it could even be site-specific planning. What would it look like to have housing and conservation and recreation areas on this site, for example. But again, we're really it's pretty open and flexible, and we really want to get your ideas on how we can continue this conversation in our towns about how we have both land conservation and more housing opportunities. So we look forward to your proposals. I am available to anyone for questions about the grant guidelines, or if you have an idea for a project but want to talk through it, feel free to reach out to me. We're looking forward to them.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for your partnership and your leadership. Now, you all will be receiving a thank you email in the next couple of days for attending and attached to that will be the grant guidelines, so you'll all have access to them in addition to going to the websites. Before we break for tonight, I just want to do a quick round of thank yous. First of all, I want to thank our partners at the Salisbury Forum for all the collaboration that we've done to lead to today. Many sessions where we learned a lot together, and we also were able to connect with the incredible panel that we've all benefited from tonight. So thank you to the Salisbury Forum. I want to thank our colleagues at the Fund for Northwest Corner because of the early partnership that we had when we thought about how we together could really support the housing crisis through bringing people together and community resources. So thank you for that group. I also want to just conclude by thanking the team at Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation. It's an extraordinary group that I get the privilege of working with today, and they were behind the scenes and working on many aspects with the team at the Salisbury Forum to make this happen. And I just want to give a particular shout out to Aileen Meehan, So hopefully tonight you have been able to take away some new insights and ideas, and I really encourage you to go back to your communities, to go back to the community groups that you're a part of, go back to your families and have conversations that are informed by the contributions from the panel tonight. And that's how good ideas and energy take root, is through conversation in communities. So thank you all for coming, and we look forward to working with you in the future.